Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. It's Joy Taylor of the Women's Business Center at Jedi. I'm here today with one of my, what do I want to say? I want to say colleagues, idols, mentors, all of the above, Rachel Hatch. Hi, Rachel.
Hello, good to be with you, Joy.
Oh, it's so great you're here. Just even preparing for this webinar, I learned so much, and I can't wait to see your final version. So you're all in for a treat today. Rachel is going to be sharing with us Foresight for Business Strategy. I love your tagline here, how to get there early. And we know that's important in business. Those who get there early, they get the prize. So Rachel, I'll make a few announcements and then let you take it away. Thanks for being here. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Some of you have been on our webinars before, and I want to talk a little bit about making the most of the webinar. We don't have audio for the participants, but we do encourage you to interact with us in the question box. So you'll see that little arrow, and it says question. Type anything in there. In fact, Rachel's got a couple polls. She's going to have you give us some ideas in the presentation, and then there will be time for Q&A. So I really do wish for you that you not only enjoy this webinar, but that it really does help you think forward so that you can have a really successful business as we move through this thing called time. The webinar is brought to you by the Women's Business Center at Jedi. We like to say we're where potential becomes prosperity, which really means you all have amazing potential. All of your ideas are amazing in their potential, and we really are here to support you taking those ideas, taking you and your gifts and talents, and really turning them into something prosperous for yourself and for our community. And we do that through all sorts of services, training classes. You can see the list: financial consultations, business planning, loan application assistance, and advanced business development, one-on-one and in workshops. So please reach out if you are not currently working with us. We're here, we're a nonprofit, and we'd love to serve you. All right, so let me introduce the futurist, Rachel Hatch. She worked for 9 years at the Institute for the Future, which is a 50-year-old think tank in Palo Alto, California. And oh my goodness, you'll find out what that means and what it's all about in a moment. But we're also really excited and want to congratulate Rachel and all of us because she just accepted and is now in a new role at the McConnell Foundation as the Program Officer for Community Vitality. So lucky us in Reading and in the area. And Rachel, your insight, your knowledge, your brilliance, we're ready for it. Help us succeed.
Thank you. Well, it's wonderful to be with you, and for those of you who are attending today, whether you're a woman in business, and so that's what attracted you to this Jedi event with the Women's Business Center. If you're a futurist geek like I am, and you're sort of a future junkie and are just drawn to any conversation about what's new and what's emerging, or if you're somebody who's an entrepreneur of some sort, maybe you're in a one-person solopreneur kind of position, maybe you have a large team that's behind you, but you're just sharpening your skills. I just want to say welcome to all of you, and men and women alike. It's great to have you with us. And as Joy pointed out, there's the question box, which she will be helping to monitor as we go. So I want this to be as interactive as possible for this kind of medium, and invite you to drop a line in the question section at any time. And Joy, feel free to interrupt me if it feels right with any of those questions. So beginning with why foresight, why think about the future? You may have heard this quote by William Gibson, who is a science fiction writer. He's a cyberpunk novelist, and he said, "The future is here, it's just unevenly distributed." And the practice of foresight is really about trying to gather that unevenly distributed future into one place so that you can experience it, you can have a focused burst of attention, really thinking about that future and planning for how will that impact your life, how will that impact your business, your broader industry of which you're a part. So hopefully in the course of this hour, you will have had a chance to experience some of that unevenly distributed future and really know what it's like to exercise the discipline of going from foresight, which is that longer term view, to insight, which is really the, what is this, so what does this mean for me? And then all the way through to action. Futures thinking is not, it's when practiced well, it's not a, navel gazing exercise. It's not just futurism for its own sake, but it's really to inform better decisions in the present. And we'll close by sharing some examples of one easy thing that you can practice on a daily or weekly basis in your business to help strengthen the foresight capacities within your own organization. And hopefully that will help take you to a place that's more resilient as a business, where you can anticipate what's coming, kind of choose which waves of change you might want to ride in your business strategy, and also to figure out which are those waves of change that you at least want to sidestep. You want to avoid being hit by them if it's something that may really threaten the business model that you've been building or the types of skill sets that you have within your company. So that's our goal, and that's why we start with foresight. Just to prime our thinking, I want you to kind of close your eyes if you can. I know it's a weirdo thing, you're sitting in front of a computer or a mobile phone, but if you can close your eyes, I just want to ask a couple of questions for us to think about the year 2027. So tune our thinking to 10 years out. No matter what industry you are in, just spend a moment imagining who your customers, who your end consumers might be in the year 2027. And I'm just going to pause so you actually linger here. Think about how your consumers and customers might change in the next decade. Give it a minute. Okay, now you've got those people in your head, and those, if it's a B2B business, you've got the business customers in your head. How might you end up recruiting talent to your organization? Whether it's, the freelancers who you work in concert with, or if it's, a whole team that you've put in place. How might you recruit the talent that you need in the year 2027? Okay. Now, what will you be selling? What's your value proposition? Think about what kind of product or service that's in your kind of lane that you're playing in today. How might that evolve? What would be relevant in the year 2027? Good. And then how will people get what you're offering? How will you distribute your product or service? What does the path to purchase look like in the year 2027? Okay, if you really have followed directions and closed your eyes, please open them. And for just all of us, one of the questions that I want to leave you with today is to really ask and answer who in your organization is responsible for spending any time thinking about or planning for questions like these. Who do you expect to have the answer? Maybe it's you yourself, and in some cases these are the questions that keep us up at night in the business world. Maybe you have a right-hand person, and you know that in your divide and conquer approach that person is really the one who's tasked with thinking about these. But feel free to take these questions and think of them as different kind of categories for thinking about the longer term future. Change happens at a pace that sometimes surprises us. And so it's important to begin thinking about these types of questions today in order to be able to be prepared for those waves of change that are coming. I know this may have been a strange thought exercise to actually close your eyes and do this, but I want to get a sense, just a quick read of the group that's assembled here in terms of attendees, to know how common is it for you to be able to spend any time thinking about or planning for the future when you're at work. So Joy, maybe you could guide us through a quick poll on this. And I can't quite hear Joy, so maybe if you're speaking, Joy, we can't hear you yet.
Little technical blip, but people are voting. So the good news is 80% of people are answering the question on their computer, Rachel.
Oh,
So
great,
thanks everyone. If you haven't yet, 100%, that's participation. Let's share the results. So Rachel, can you see the results there?
yeah, okay, yep, that's great. So it looks as though we have a spread. This is encouraging, actually. So 20% of you, or 40% of you, I should say, spend at least a portion of your time, 20% or more, thinking about or planning for the future at work. And others of you probably have, a little bit of time that perhaps you spend a couple of days each year trying to do a strategic plan for what are the next 3 years for me and my business. So that's a solid number, and we have a little bit in between. I'm delighted to see that there isn't anybody who spends no time thinking about the future. I think that's a really encouraging moment to actually understand. So that helps get a snapshot of where you all are at in terms of thinking about the future. Now let me just go. Let me go to a little bit of context about where I'm coming from when I think about the future. So I think of myself as an alumni of Institute for the Future. Joy mentioned this is a group that's based in Palo Alto. It's an independent nonprofit research group, and is cross-disciplinary. So there's a lot of research around technology, but also health and healthcare, future of governance, future of education and learning, future of philanthropy, cities, and so on. So it's a group of about a little less than 50 people who have been thinking about the long-term future, usually looking 10 years out. And there's an important distinction that Institute for the Future has made over the years, that the whole point of this is not really to predict the future, because if we're honest, nobody can really do that with a high degree of accuracy in a point forecast sense. And by that I mean, predicting, well, X event is going to happen on Y date sometime in the future. So that's not really what this is all about. And so if you came to this webinar thinking, oh, good, someone can predict the future, I'm sorry to disabuse you of that notion. Really, the world is far too combinatorial and emergent and uncertain for that. But there is a point, and the point is really to forecast the future, and that's to share a plausible view. So by plausible, what I mean here is this is something that is in the range of possibility. So in conversation today, what I'm going to talk about are all things I think are plausible. And that I would draw a distinction to black swans. Some of you may have read about black swans. These are events that seem to come out of nowhere. They required a combination of highly unlikely things that, through their combinatorial effect, create an event that becomes quite surprising to everyone. So that's an important discipline, but it's not really the core of forecasting. For forecasting, to make it practical to your business strategy, it's really about plausible futures. Typically, there's an internally consistent view, by which I mean, there's a world of the future that you can start to characterize, and it all kind of hangs together. And if you're thinking about, something that's happening in retail, that's going to affect something that's happening in e-commerce. And so you want to make sure that all of those elements are internally consistent with each other, that they kind of hang together and make sense. And then third, that there are intentionally provocative views of what might happen 10 years out. We humans have a tendency in business and in life to just kind of rehearse the same kinds of stories that we've told ourselves about the future. We tend to make assumptions that what's happening today can kind of be forecast forward, that it's going to be very similar to today, but more of it, whatever topic we're discussing. And so it's important as we challenge ourselves to think about the future, to intentionally go to some things that might feel quite provocative. of what might happen in the future. And then to back into the question, well, if that happens, what would that mean for my business and for my strategy as an entrepreneur or as someone who's in a long established business? So challenge yourself to think provocatively. After all, if you look back in history, and I think it's really important to look back in order to look forward, we often find that there are incidents that feel like, oh, that'll never happen. And of course, you know, as time marches on, we find ourselves undergoing a lot of transformation. So that's why it's important to stick with and challenge yourself with a provocative view of the future. The last thing I'll say just about the background with Institute for the Future is that it's been such a gift of that experience over the last 9 years to look at a wide range of industries, some not-for-profits, some government groups, but everything from, you know, the future of fun in a theme park to the future of media with media companies, future of transportation and logistics, future of philanthropy, future of human connectivity and relationships, you know, a whole range of things that organizations are interested in. So I'll share a couple of signals of change today from that work and examples from just practical business contexts. And I hope that this will provide a source of comfort for those of us who are in smaller and emerging organizations, because if you find yourself challenged to carve out the time to think about the future, this set of logos representing organizations should cue you that you are not at all alone in that. Even large-scale organizations struggle to balance thinking about the long-term future and then the tyranny of the present, as it's sometimes referred to. So there's always that dance, including for organizations like these. How do you go about studying the future? There's no, history of the future, right? So there's no history books that have been written and where you can start to tell the story of the future. So a few of the methods that I find really useful in how to sense some of the changes that are happening. One is to conduct expert interviews. Some of you probably did this when you were first setting up your businesses. You went to people who know a lot about the cutting edge of whatever business you're in, and just spent time asking questions and getting a bit curious about how change is playing out at the edges. Ethnography can be quite useful, and some of you may already be deploying this in your businesses, where perhaps you take a look at your consumers or your B2B customers, and you try to understand, well, what does this mean in their daily lives? How do they see their experience today, and also how that might emerge? A third method for learning about the future that I find quite useful, and I wanted to make sure to mention this because these are usually free. So for those of you who are scrappy startups, to go to meetups, go to meetup.com and check out what meetups are happening in your area that might be more at the cutting edge of things. So for instance, here in Redding, California, there's a meetup that I've been a part of for less than a year. It's really kind of cutting edge, and it's the North State blockchain meetup. So it's a particular, it's organized around a particular technology, and there are people who are interested in understanding, well, what might this mean for my industry? Those are free events, so for scrappy, startups and small businesses, it's especially important to make use of those kinds of resources. Also in our area, there are groups like the Reading area designers and developers, a lot of these that are really at the edges of change. Hackathons are a similar useful tool. These are instances where people get together. They may have some technology skills, they may have some design skills, and in the course of a very short period of time, they hack a solution together using the knowledge that they already have and the tools that are at their disposal. So that's another great tool. Online forecasting games is another kind of method for sensing the future. And at the end of the webinar, I'll share the URL for Institute for the Future if you ever want to go there. There are forecasting games that are happening all the time. And then the last, I don't think there's a right term of art for this, but simply online research. Some of us know this as Googling around to use the technical term. And this is, an underestimated method just for understanding what is what's happening at the cutting edge. So at the end of the webinar, I'll share some of my go-to resources when I'm trying to understand the cutting edge of things, so that you can take those, if any of those are useful to you, you can jot those down and, just fold them into your information streams. Research retreats can also be really useful, especially if they're hands-on, and that's been a part of the kind of background that I'll bring with me today to this webinar. So I mentioned the difference between foresight and prediction. The last thing that I'll add here is that it's longer term. So what I want to challenge us all to do today is to think beyond this quarter and think perhaps beyond this fiscal year and your budgeting cycles, and really attempt to look further out, look 3 years out, even look 10 years out if you're really up for a challenge. And so we'll try to calibrate our thinking a little bit to what that feels like to think in that time horizon. I do want to get a sense of your team size, and who all is involved. So I wonder if we can do this other quick poll about how many employees you have.
Okay, the poll is launched. We have some people voting. And how many employees do you have? Give it a couple more seconds. We have 77% voted. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. There you have it.
All right, we have some serious warriors who are one-person firms. That's the majority of us, 55%. And then the biggest, it looks like 9%, have somewhere between 10 and 50. I know that's quite a range, but there's all the science around how you get above 50 and you have a very different critical threshold for your organization. So I just wanted to get a sense of who all is under that. And it looks like all of us are. Thank you for that, Joy. Okay, so I'm going to bring that in mind as I think about which examples to share, and in terms of how different organizations have put foresight into practice in their daily operations. So this is a core strategy. This visual, I'm going to walk us through this because there's a lot here. But this is a visual that's from Institute for the Future, and this really shows what it is to move from foresight to insight to action. So let's start at the top of this. Just left of center, you see that this is all about preparing your mind. So that's the kind of calibration process that we're doing right now as we head into the webinar. Preparing our minds to sense provocative futures. You can see kind of a binoculars visual metaphor that's here at the top. And then coming down the right side, there's really an intuitive journey between foresight and insight. And so I know everybody sort of has a different profile of how much you're a thinking person or a feeling person. And if you find yourself, whether it's futures that you're drawn to or futures that you're kind of repelled by, if you find yourself having some emotions where it feels, oh, this is kind of an intuitive process, I don't have a way of knowing about this with certainty, then you're probably in the right lane for this leap from foresight to insight. It really is an intuitive journey. And once you land on an insight, so this is about sense making. So in a minute, I'm going to share some examples of organizations that have gone from foresight to insight to action, just so you have some practical examples. But an insight is that aha moment. It's really asking, well, what does this mean for me and for my business? If something is happening out there in the external environment, is it going to be highly disruptive to me? Only a little bit? Is it a huge opportunity? Do I have to, make big changes in order to get there, or is it just a subtle tweak? And so that's with discipline, to go from foresight to insight is, half the battle right there. Then from insight, that's when rubber meets the road. You start to create some strategy around whatever that insight is that's provoked by the future. And it's critical to turn the corner to deciding what are the actions that I could take today that would make a difference, that would help steer me towards success in my business strategy, that would actually make a difference. And when you think of actions that are relevant, I mean, this could be something that has to do with something you need to do in the next week. Like, I need to put this on my priority list for the next week. It could be something that's in the 30-day, 3-month, 6-month time horizon. But it's important to help calibrate the actions that you brainstorm to when you want to kind of blackmail yourself to get it done. So always associate a time horizon with any action that you might brainstorm. And then finally, coming back up to foresight, you'll notice that this is a cyclical process. So any actions that you take, you want to learn about how those played out. So you have the discipline of hindsight, so that you can do your own kind of after action review, to borrow the term from the military, and assess, how did that go? What did I learn from it? What went well? What does that teach me about how to calibrate to futures thinking and to foresight? So this is the basic strategy that we want to go to, and hopefully it will, as a business leader, it will result in a clearer sense of vision and understanding, and a bit more agility for how you might make the quick changes and the tough judgment calls that sometimes have to be made in business to be successful. Okay, so I want to share some case studies and just underscore that these are from the Institute for the Future. These are examples from businesses who have agreed to publicly share how they went through foresight to insight to action. So the first one is from Procter Gamble. You may know this company because they do, for instance, they make Tide detergent. So it's a consumer packaged goods company. That's just one of their brands. They have many. They're global. So it's a very different scale from most of us who are on the line, who are, one single person employer situations. But I want to walk through an example of a really practical, low cost foresight to insight to action cycle that they went through together with Institute for the Future. So up in the upper right, first they realized that there's so the Institute for the Future actually went to Procter & Gamble and was discussing this at the time, a coming wave of change of biotechnology. So this is really the fusion of the life sciences with technology, and the impact that would start to have on Procter & Gamble products like household products or baby care products or makeup, all the things that they produce. So this was the foresight. It can be, when you're thinking of foresight, it can really be as categorical as that. It can be, there's this blob on the horizon of biotech, and I don't even know how to put my hands around it yet, but I can tell it's going to be important. So that can be an example of a foresight. The insight, so they realized, as they looked around the senior leadership table there at Procter & Gamble, they realized that there weren't really any people at that top leadership table who knew enough about biotechnology to be able to make good, sound business decisions. So they knew pretty soon they would have vendors coming to them, they would have others who really relate to that field, that growing field of biotech, and they would need to make decisions about who they were going to invest in and everything else. So the insight can be as simple as, we don't know enough about that, and we need to. So then the action, very creative. In this case, they organized a reverse mentoring program where they took some really scientists who were in this case, sort of like in the R&D organization, kind of in the bowels of the building, and brought them up to the C-suite level to talk with senior executives about biotechnology. So it's junior people mentoring senior people. They met informally, so it was one-on-one meetings. Each of these junior people was assigned a senior person, and then they created a follow-up kind of action plan to create a biotech strategy. So it was kind of growing the senior leadership's literacy with biotech. Now this all used internal resources. It did not take money to do this action, and that's really critical to note, is that sometimes just using the resources that you already have and configuring them differently can be the action that will take you to where you need to go. And then they continued to calibrate that. So they continued engaging with reverse mentors to begin to implement that biotech strategy. And for those of you on the line who had between 10 to 50 employees, when you're thinking about growing the talent of your organization, this is a really smart way to do it. Get somebody assigned to, who already knows about some of the more cutting edge stuff, and get them to, if you're a more senior person, get them to mentor you. If you're a more junior person, offer a couple of kind of one-pager briefs to the people who ought to be making informed decisions. And that will help your company be more resilient in the face of change. Now, if you're one of those solopreneurs, I know a lot of you are, in this kind of instance, you could even think about this with an intern. I mean, it could be as simple as that. And I think this probably most commonly happens when there are foresights around emerging marketing strategies. I know a lot of you probably utilize, maybe it's a social media intern. This is somebody who may be way younger than you, much more junior in terms of experience, but who just has a deeper familiarity with a certain area. So it may be about social media, it may be about something like biotech. It depends on the industry you're in. But this is a really good example of how an organization put foresight to work for them. Here's another example. This is from Tesco. So any of you who might be in the retailer space, this kind of example will be useful. So in 2008, at that point, this was a time when Institute for the Future was tracking the rise of the global well-being economy. And it probably feels quite familiar to you today if you think about how most products have a value proposition that people interact, most products that people interact with have a value proposition that has to do with how to drive a sense of well-being, how this product is going to make you healthier, more rested, all of that. So this was the foresight. Global well-being is going to become a bigger driver in the economy. Now, of course, we've ended up almost at the end of that 10-year forecast, and so we've seen how it started to play out. The insight that Tesco generated from this foresight is that shoppers are probably going to want to engage with a greater sense of well-being, even in the act of shopping. So as they're crafting a retail environment, how can they generate a sense of well-being and associate that with the Tesco experience and the Tesco brand? So in this case, this actually ended up being a partnership between Procter Gamble, who I mentioned earlier, and Tesco, who then worked together to redesign a particular part of the Tesco store. So they focused in on the health and beauty section specifically, and they made, they changed the flooring, they changed the lighting, all of these things that as everyday people, when we walk into a store, we may not explicitly realize this kind of change has happened, but it does shape and give some subtle cues in the path to purchase that associates the experience with greater well-being. One more example. So this is from the food. If any of you are in the food space, maybe you have a business like you're making food in your home. I know that the cottage industries in the state of California in particular, the regulatory environment is becoming much more friendly to that. So it's possible for solopreneurs to be in that space. So in this case, it was Campbell's food, and we were describing at that Institute for the Future was describing at that time how healthy, portable, nutritious eating was really starting to grow as an industry driver. So I'll just pause here and say that hopefully you all feel like you have a handle on what are those industry best practice kind of aggregators, so some site that you can go to or some professional association where you can glean, what are those industry-wide changes that are happening. And a foresight may really come from something like that. That may be the origin of how it starts to come onto the radar screen of your business. The insight was that Campbell's wanted, Campbell asked, well, where is our space to play in, if that's the wave of change? And it was really around nourishing lives. So the action that they took is they created what they then described a new destination statement. Normal consumers like us experience this as like a brand byline. So this was a marketing expression of how the foresight turns into insight and action. And this was nourishing people's lives everywhere, every day. And they started to create some new metrics for how they would track progress against that statement. And they shared it publicly. They also used it internally to their organization. So that's another example of how you move from foresight to insight to action. I'm going to pause before I move on. So, Joy, if there are any questions, again, feel free to interrupt at any time, and I'll head on to signals of change after this.
Okay, so far no questions, but feel free if anyone does want to make a comment or a question, and we'll make sure Rachel responds to it.
Cool, cool. Okay, so now we've talked about foresight to insight to action, and now I want to turn the corner to a skill that I think all of us can practice on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and this is really the skill of scanning for signals of change. So what's a signal of change? This is a small or a local innovation that has the potential to really disrupt the status quo, has the potential to scale in terms of size of impact or in terms of geography of where this particular change pops up. The benefit of tracking signals of change is that, first of all, it helps you, it's kind of an imaginative exercise. It helps you to imagine possible futures. It gives you some tangible inspiration and allows you to capture some emerging phenomenon before they become obvious. So each of you in your businesses have the choice to make, am I going to try to get ahead of the curve? Is the whole skate where the puck is going? Is that your positioning? Are you a fast follower? And particularly if you're trying to calibrate to your strategy of that, then it's important to track signals of change because that'll give you a sense of the pace of how quickly things are changing. Signals also ground any discussion of possible futures in the current day because a signal has to be something you can point to in the current marketplace. And so it makes it so that when you're having a discussion about planning for the future, it doesn't feel like it's some distant, science fiction novel or something like that. It's actually quite grounded in the present. So I want to share a couple of signals of change, and after I share these, I want to remind you of the tool of signals of change and then actually invite you to share a few of your own. So think of this as kind of, as you're listening, be thinking about a signal of change that you might want to add to the conversation. So the first one, anybody who's from our local area who's tuned in may be familiar, but for anybody who's not, this is a signal of change that's quite specific. So again, you always want a signal to be something that you can point to that's actually happening today. And so in this case, it was an event that's happening, and this was the first ever Shasta County Mini Maker Faire. So this happened at the Reading Civic Auditorium. It was the very first instance. There are maker fairs that began way back in 2007-8 time span in the Bay Area. They're now all across the country. There's been a National Week of Making that then President Barack Obama had held at the White House. So this is something that has proliferated over the course of the last decade. And now it's actually here in the Reading area. So 3,000 people showed up for the very first one of these, which is quite remarkable. That's a signal of change in and of itself when an audience that big, a set of participants that big shows up. So this happened last fall. This is a signal of change that points to a broader foresight. And the foresight is all around the maker movement. This is the desire that people have to make things with their own hands, to put a personalized touch on something and to connect with other people in the process of that. So I share this particular signal of change because I think it points to a shift that's happening across many of your businesses. I'm sure you're seeing this already where you sit, which is that people have an expectation that they will have some role in making the things that are important to them in their lives. So for those of you on the line, this is a good time to just pause when you see a signal of change like this. This is a local marketplace signal, so depending on if you sell your product or service, if you're more of an exporter, international exporter, or if you're a regional exporter, or if you're local, but particularly if you're local, you want to know that this kind of appetite exists already here in our area. So think about your product or service. What are you already doing that invites people to be part of the process of making? What could you be doing in terms of the production process or the distribution process, to begin to invite people to be a bit more hands-on, or to just put their personalized touch, to have a design choice maybe that they make that's part of it. And that, that's if you find a signal of change like this, those are the types of questions that it should provoke for you. So there's example number one. I'll share another example. This is Amazon Prime subscriber growth. So particularly for those of you who are in online retail or in bricks and mortar retail, I'm sure you've seen this trend coming. It's been unfolding for quite a long time. This particular graph I just drew from Business Insider. So you may be scanning, the newspaper or an online media source and come across some quantitative data, and that can be a signal of change. So in this case, it's a study that Amazon themselves released this data in conjunction with some others to see the growth of Amazon Prime. And for anybody who was paying attention yesterday, you may have noted that it was Amazon Prime Day, which they've had for several years running now. The early reports are that sales grew by more than 60% this year compared to the previous year. So that's incredible growth. You can see the exponential curve here, which is at play. So when I see a signal of change like this, I start to think about, well, how is this going to change the path to purchase for anybody who might want to access my product or my service? If you're somebody who has a bricks and mortar retail environment, it might mean that you need to diversify, if you haven't already, how you approach that element of your business. It could mean that there's a whole new market segment that you could have access to that you haven't had access to before. One of the characteristics of Amazon Prime subscribers is that oftentimes there'll be people who are really doing subscriptions for their lives. So you may know that Amazon is, they got their start with the Prime deliveries and kind of scheduled deliveries with people like young families who need diapers or whatever it is replenished on a regular basis. So you might want to be asking yourself, what in my business is a replenishment model? Could there be a replenishment model? Is that something that actually suits my business? And so just start asking yourself those kinds of questions, or continue asking them if you already are. That's the type of conversation that might be provoked by this kind of signal of change. Here's another one. This signal of change is in the form of an app, and it's called Trove. And they describe it as insurance on demand. So those of you who have seen other on-demand types of businesses, whether it's, if you're in the transportation business, you may have seen Uber or Lyft or any of those, which are on-demand ride-sharing services. In this case, Trove is on-demand insurance. And, oftentimes we think of industries like insurance or finance as, as things that are maybe stodgy, like they don't go through business model transformations all that often, but boy, is there ever one in store when it comes to the financial services and insurance sector. So what Trove does is it enables a consumer to take stock of all of their possessions. So in this case, this is on an electronics panel of the app. Take stock of their possessions, and then to selectively insure a possession for just a particular period of time. So just like with a car with Uber, you just have access to that car for 15 minutes, say, because you're coming home from a night out and you want to get home safely, and it's just the 15 minutes of access to that car that you need. Similarly with Trove, this is a startup that gives you access to insurance. Instead of, for a month or for a 6-month policy, it can give you access to insurance for a weekend or for a single day. So for example, people who are really into skiing, for instance, and have really high-end recreation equipment, or biking, they might know, okay, I'm going on this crazy expedition for this particular set of 4 days, and so I'm going to up on-demand insurance through a group like Trove for that period of time, just so that I have access to that protection for the time that I need it most. The rest of the time, they just sit in my closet. I'm not so worried about it. But, you know, if I were to break my really nice camera or my really nice ski equipment or bicycle, I'd want to have the protection just when I need it. Another example would be, so Trove very cleverly launched their latest version of their app at an Airbnb summit. So some of you may be familiar with Airbnb. If you're not, it's kind of like a hotel in people's homes that you might have access to just for a day when you're traveling in a city. So you you book a room at somebody's house, or you use your house as a host and you invite someone in, or you can rent out your whole home. And it's an on-demand sort of app. So if you need a room tonight, you can look even at Redding, California, and there are dozens and dozens of listings to be able to have access to that as an alternative to hotels on demand. So all of that to say that Trove launched their most recent version of their app at an Airbnb summit for hosts. The reason was they realized that hosts who are on Airbnb have a reason to need insurance protections when they have strangers in their home. So let's say they're renting out their entire home. They typically have whatever, insurance policy that covers their possessions. But if they have, they're renting out their whole home over the New Year's weekend or something like that, they might want to add some additional protections that are just on demand and just in time. So the question for all of you in terms of your business model is to ask, what is it that I'm providing, whatever good or service that might be useful to offer on demand? Does that business model actually, as people become more accustomed to it, does that business model actually change what your consumers will expect of you? And I think that's where any of these signals of change, they're quite specific examples. In this case, I'm showing a very tech-centric view of it. It's an app. But ultimately, in any signal of change, you want to be asking, well, how is this technology going to interact with culture, with changing consumer or customer expectations of me and my business? Because those things that may start in a different industry, in this case, this is an example from the insurance industry, it may actually have a ripple effect to the business area that you're in, even if you're not in an area where you think, oh, on-demand insurance is going to threaten my business. But it just might, things like this condition consumer expectations a little bit differently. Another one, this one is quite challenging, a signal of change. In this case, it was a research study that came from Oxford University, and they were anticipating that nearly half of US jobs are likely to be automated in the course of the next decade. And if you go deeper into the study, it really suggests, particularly in areas like the service sector, and I think there are probably some people who are on the line who are in that sector. That's an area that will get automated. Health and healthcare, surprisingly, when it comes to automation and artificial intelligence, that's an area that's ripe for disruption. So there are some areas that are prevalent in the JEDI kind of region, I guess you could say, that are likely to be impacted by this. So when I see a study like this, if I were in business, the question I would be asking is, what are the parts of my business that are likely to get automated? How would that affect my supply chain for the things that, the things that I need to get in order to make whatever I'm making? And how would that change the way that you approach labor and the workforce? This is one of those challenging waves of change that is likely to have really dramatic implications, and it's a little bit hard to even wrap our minds around it at this point. So I would suggest for anybody on the line who's interested in automation or who thinks that your business might be disrupted by it, to just begin kind of steeping in this stuff and trying to understand, well, where is this happening first? In the electronics business, if any of you are involved in that sector, Foxconn, which is one of the world's largest producers of iPhones, Foxconn automated something on the scale of 20,000, 30,000 jobs in one of their factories all at once recently. So this is the kind of thing that can have dramatic effects and is leaping forward quite quickly right now. Last signal of change. So any of you who do online businesses, maybe you're like an online therapist, or you do coaching, and so you're doing video chats with people. This signal of change is for you. So this is actually called Us Plus, and I'll kind of walk us through this visual. This comes from an artist named Lauren McCarthy, who's based in Brooklyn. So here I'll just pause and say that artists can actually be fantastic sources of signals of change, because artists in some senses are they're involved in speculative, futures-oriented things all the time. They're voicing things that are intuitively perceived, and so I find that they can be really useful sources of signals of change. So Lauren McCarthy, who you can see in this image, she created, as an art project, she created a plugin to Google Hangouts. So some of you use probably Skype or Google Hangouts or Zoom or whatever for your online businesses. In this case, this is a plugin for Google Hangouts. And what she was playing around with is the interaction between two people, and how you could actually start to get a better sense of the emotional landscape of the person you're talking to. So starting in the upper right, you can see a basic kind of smiley face or neutral or frowny face of the person that you're speaking with. And this changes in real time. So this is about 2 minutes into this conversation between these two people. She created what are some pretty rudimentary algorithms for tracking positivity, aggression, honesty in the course of the conversation. And she does this by using a combination of the facial recognition that is already possible using your built-in webcam, and also some what's called speech-to-text analysis. So they take, the words spoken in a conversation, can quickly sift those into written format, and then can detect, how positively the positive or negative kind of emotional connotation of what you've been saying. The humorous element you can see here at the bottom, you've been automated because you're talking too much. So imagine, if you're involved in a conversation, maybe you're an online financial planner or an online coach or whatever, you might be able to have, the point is, you might be able to have a whole lot more intel about the emotional landscape of your conversation partner as you go. So I imagine, let's say that you're a coach and you're coaching a couple, for instance. You could probably tell 10 years from now, you could be able to tell, well, if one party or the other that you're sitting across from miles away, but you're on Google Hangout that you're sitting across from, if one party or the other is engaged, disengaged, begin to get a sense of that. So this is the kind of early signal of change that points to a future direction of change. As you're thinking about building out your online business, you might want to consider things like this. And the term of art for this is called affective technology, AFFECTIVE, affective technology, and it's really just it's emotion sensing technology. So take this a step away from the particular example of online coaching or whatever it is. You might want to ask, well, how might emotion sensing technology impact my business? In reality, there are devices all around us that actually are picking up our emotions actively. If you have an Xbox in your home, like the gaming console, Xbox famously had a system like this in one of its recent versions that stayed on whether you were playing the game or not, playing a game on it or not, and it could do, recognition of your posture and then collect data about that. So really the surfaces of our environments in retail environments are starting to collect emotional data about us, and all of that is going into marketing, consumer research, how the value proposition for a product gets voiced. So if you have retail partners that you work with, you might expect that within the next decade that this will be a part of your conversations that you would be having. Your value proposition of your product might include, it makes people feel X, Y, or Z, fill in the blank. And we know this because we have this particular data. Now, this is a kind of signal of change. You'll notice that sometimes there are futures that feel a little bit creepy, honestly, as the technology comes on board and as it starts to get implemented. Pay attention to that feeling if you have it, because ultimately the waves of change, that the kinds of futures that you experience that you feel provoked by, sometimes it's useful just to know which ones you want to steer clear of also. So maybe this is over your business's threshold. Maybe it feels too creepy or too invasive, or you have a commitment to privacy that's part of your brand values. Well, you want to know this is coming because you're going to have some choices to make. So that's the purpose of scanning for these kinds of signals. This presentation will be available afterwards, and I just want to point to this is a template by Institute for the Future. They're doing trainings now to equip people in foresight skills, so you can actually go to the foresight studio that's there and have an immersion on what are, if scanning for signals of change is one tool, what are the other tools of foresight? So this is an example of the type of tool kit. This is, let's say you're involved in a team of 10 people. You're one of those people, people who responded. You might want to gather your team and actually spend, between 5 minutes and 5 days. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's you start a staff meeting by asking, hey, what signals of change have you all seen recently? And this template just gives you a sense of what you might want to ask people to prepare, how long you might want to afford for that kind of exercise. And you could send this page along to your team, or if you're a solopreneur, you might invite people in your industry who are your kind of go-to thought partners to join you in thinking about signals of change. And to remind them that signals of change can be like a new product, a practice, a different type of behavior that you're seeing in your consumer set, a market strategy, a new change in the policy or regulatory environment, technology, and so on. So hopefully this will be a good resource for you to take back either to your team or to any of your industry thought partners. So anybody have a signal of change that you want to share just as we're closing? I'm curious if anybody has typed anything into the question box, and otherwise we can also open it up to broader questions.
All right, so go ahead and share in the question box if you have a signal of change, or you think you might, what's a trend, what's coming in the future in your industry or just in general, or if you have any questions. Climate change, big chunk of the ice broke off this morning. That just came in, Rachel.
Yes, yeah. So in terms of climate change, and I mean, think about this is one of those things that affects humans on many levels and affects business on many levels. One of the questions to be asking is around your supply chain and the way that you get the products that you need, because at least according to most of the research that I've seen from Institute for the Future and others, we can expect to see more of these kind of extreme weather events happening. So, picture not just the image that the person added in the question box, but also, where it's about rising sea levels, and but also consider where you may have unexpected events happening in your supply chain that could affect the way that your goods get to the final destination. So this is certainly something to anticipate. You may have seen that the U.S. military actually, I think it was 3 years ago now, they identified climate change as one of the largest threats to U.S. national security. So, thinking about it from that perspective as well is quite important. Any others?
Yeah, I've got 3. So one of them was less specific gender roles.
Yep. Yes, and here the place to go to see, you probably have seen, I think it was this past week, Target made the change in some of their stores. So if you're getting a back to school backpack this fall, there's, quote unquote boys backpacks, girls backpacks, and then also a gender neutral set of offerings. So retailers, especially in fashion, are getting ahead of this curve. So important to think about this when you imagine who you're designing for and how they think about their role in the world and the way that they might do some self-expression.
Another signal of change, customization of goods. For example, shampoos and perfumes made just for you. Mm-hmm. Customization.
Yep. And was there a 4th also? These are great.
Closing of shopping malls.
Yes. Yeah. I was actually just researching a little bit about a firm that's based in Paris, and they focus on specifically on pop-up retail to try to figure out how, in abandoned shopping spaces, whether it's in the heart of a downtown or if it's in a large mall, how those can be inhabited by pop-up shops on an hourly or daily basis as opposed to longer term tenants, because that closing of the malls is certainly disrupting how people buy things, and it's also really affecting cities, so cities are taking note. Before we go, I just want to put up a few. I mean, I started making this list, you all, and I could have gone on forever, so I just limited myself to five go-to resources that I really appreciate when it comes to looking for signals of change. These range from biological research, because science impacts a lot of things. So nature is a great go-to there. If you're interested in technology trends, MIT Tech Review and PSFK are good ones. DARPA that I mentioned the military earlier because they're an excellent source of early intel. DARPA stands for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, kind of a weirdo acronym, but think about this. They were the people who really started the ARPANET, so hence the name DARPA. The ARPANET was the Advanced Research Projects Agency, and that was the precursor to the internet. So these were the people who were studying the internet before it became the internet. And so if you want to really look at some of the big transformations, I recommend that. And of course, Institute for the Future, IFTF.org. And I want to give a big hat tip to my former colleagues there and everything that they're doing to continue to make the world rich with foresight. So I hope in your business strategy that you can start to just weave in a little bit more of the discipline of brushing up on foresight, and maybe we can have more of us move into that category of spending 20% or more of your time thinking about and planning for the future. So thanks to everybody for joining today. And Joy, you want to wrap us up?
I do. I want to wrap us up, but I know we're running out of time. I just have two more comments that came in. Actually,
Okay.
one's a question for you, but one of the signals of change is around the education industry, and this particular person said career and technical education through the community college system is seeing emerging competition from businesses who are self-educating and contracting out to private resources. So,
Yep.
yeah. I don't know if you want to do any comment on education in general. There's quite a lot of signals of change in the world of education.
Yeah, and some great folks locally, some great folks who are at Shasta College and are involved in the Foundation for California Community Colleges are doing some experimentation around micro-credentials. So, instead of getting, not necessarily instead of, sometimes in addition to getting a longer-term degree, that you might also want to measure and validate learning that's happening at the micro scale. So it's, a 3 hours that I spent learning this, whatever this is. And they're doing a great job of bridging how that relates, what the bridge is between educational institutions and people in the workforce who want to hire people who have skills. So I highly recommend Googling around on micro-credentials and the Foundation for California Community Colleges.
That's great. And then someone commented online platforms, of course, also changing in the trend of education, which is why we do webinars and we're doing more and more online at Jedi.
Yes.
So Rachel, this has been a great hour. There was one really interesting question I'd like you to answer, and then I'll go ahead and close out the webinar. But what is your advice about living in a community that clings to the status quo and maybe feels threatened by change? This came in from one of the listeners today.
That's a great, that's a great ongoing inquiry of mine, and I'm sure some of yours on the phone as well. I think in foresight, it's really helpful to feel like to find a way to find your tribe. So that you don't feel alone in that kind of context. And in some cases it might, you might look around and ask, well, who else, if I'm in a small business, who else is innovating in my sector? So that you can actually join forces, compare notes with them. and reflect on some of the changes that are happening. And then the other thing I would say is to find the groups that inspire you. See if you can, I've always been impressed by how responsive people outside of the local community are if you just reach out to them and say, hey, I really think it's innovative what you're doing in blah blah, whatever that space is. Can I talk with you, or can you come visit and give a talk to my group? And that's another way to give yourself your own food for the journey, I guess is how I would put it.
Wow. Well, thank you. It is really helpful to find like-minded people that want to talk about the future and are willing to change. And all of those people who get strengthened in that have friends who might not be as open, but it's pretty amazing over time how it's inevitable. And I think you've really illustrated that so clearly today. It's inevitable, these trends, whether we like them, they're not even trends. These insights and foresight, it's inevitable. So how will we take action in our own business? And I really want to just encourage those of you that are self-employed, or you have the small businesses like we saw in the poll. You can set up a one-on-one business strategy session with one of the Women in Business Center Jedi counselors, and we can, with you, do some market research, talk about the future trends. So, you have this great resource through us to have someone else engaged with you in really beginning to look forward, look at what's coming, and then make better decisions on how you want to respond to those. And Rachel, you've really helped us with the framework to be able to do that, if we do it individually or if we do it in groups or do it through the counseling. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, please join us for our next webinar and our upcoming events. If you want to show the next slide, we've got a lot of great things coming. In fact, tomorrow, explore and find the financing that fits your business needs. And this Meet the Lenders is an annual event. I encourage you come if you can. There'll be food and beverages, wonderful panel and discussions, people who've done Kiva loans, people who've done some outside of the box loans, and then of course traditional lending. And even if you don't think you need money now, you might in the future, and it might help you just also network and meet some other business owners. So you're welcome to join us. And then once a month, we're in Reading for the Women Entrepreneurs Thrive Together event, and Christy Largent will be speaking Tuesday the 18th at noon. You can find all of these events, by the way, at our e-jedi.org on our site under schedule, or at Facebook. How to repair and build your credit coming up also this month. Exploring business ownership. If you know someone who's thinking about starting a business, this is a great 2-hour investment to find out if they have what it takes and what does it take. And then our next webinar will be on crowdfunding. Talk about would you say that was a signal of change about what, 10 years ago?
Oh yeah, yep.
And it's only growing more and more. We see so much happening in these social platforms, including getting money from your following and creating a following through the fundraising campaigns, the crowdfunding. So that's going to be with an expert out of Southern California. Really great webinar next month, August 9th at noon. And every week we do have an open bookkeeping lab, so misery loves company. If you've got lots of updating to do with your numbers of your business, come on in with your computer or use our laptop and get current on your money. And then the final slide, I think, Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're welcome to join as a member. A lot of you are clients, not everyone is a member, but for a simple $25 a year, you can say yes to all these benefits, but also just yes to the community. It's a way to give to our nonprofit and really help things like these webinars exist. So Rachel, any last words of wisdoms for those of us who want to spend more 15% or 20% of our time thinking about the future?
I would just go back to the William Gibson quote, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And I feel like once your mind is kind of primed to scanning for those signals of change, you'll really start to see it all around. And that makes for a really rich life experience and hopefully also for a more resilient business strategy.
I love that. So all of you here live, or if you're listening to the recording, this is a great call to action. Look for signals of change. Just let's open our eyes to them, and then we can, the ones that affect our industry, our business directly, we can start making some really good choices about if we want to be engaged or how we're going to respond to that signal of change. I love it. I'm hooked. All right. Well, thanks again, Rachel, and thanks everyone for being with us. There's a little survey at the end of the webinar. Let us know what else you'd like to learn. So every month we can bring you these free events online, and make it a great week, everyone. Thanks. Bye, Rachel.
Thank you.